And begin. So again, hello, welcome. We are happy that you're joining us today and appreciate you taking time from your busy schedules. My name is Kimberly. I'm part of the QGIve team. And if you haven't had the opportunity to work with us before, we're an online fundraising platform dedicated to helping nonprofits raise more money. And we do that through webinars such as this. Today's webinar will be about 45 minutes with a 15-minute Q&A session to follow. So our time together will be just around an hour or a little under. We will be recording today's presentation and sending everyone a link to that, as well as a copy of the presentation and some other resources that we mentioned. So please be on the lookout for that. It will be coming out on Monday. We are also going to be live tweeting today's webinar, the highlights. So if you are a Twitter user, please take note of the hashtag QGIve webinar. Our username is QGIve. Would love to see you online with us. But today we're also very happy to introduce you to Qunari Consulting, and we do value our partners, and so we like to connect our partner network to our nonprofit friends and hopefully help the nonprofits with effectiveness and success. And so Qunari Consulting helps nonprofits such as yours build relationships with donors by creating passionate advocates. And so Mary, our speaker today, will be sharing a little bit more with us to help with that. So together we hope that we help you engage with donors and increase your annual fundraising. So as I mentioned, our speaker today is Mary. Mary Sumners is the Vice President of Annual Giving at Qunari Consulting. And as you'll hear, Mary brings incredible expertise in annual giving strategies and capital campaign management. So enough of me, over to you, Mary.
All right, thank you so much. And thanks to everyone at QGIve for having us today. I'm really excited to talk about this subject. This is something that for a lot of our clients, especially over the last year, has really been something that so many nonprofits are thinking about. We all went through that time where we weren't sure what was going to happen with giving here as we were all kind of navigating COVID and how that would impact our organizations. And I think what we've seen is that giving remains strong during that time. And now is when our nonprofits are kind of emerging and saying, okay, now we're ready to either revisit the discussion we were having about starting a capital campaign, or this has really exposed a reason for us to start thinking through what the next steps might be toward a capital campaign. And this is one of those things where, you know, those of you who are development professionals and executive directors, you know, we hear this from our volunteers and board a lot of times. You know, we need a capital campaign, we need a building, we need to do these things. And a lot of times it's easy to see that quick need if it's a building, and sometimes there's some other pieces in there that are a little bit harder to see. And as fundraising professionals, I think sometimes we look at it and go, okay, you know, how am I going to be successful in completing a capital campaign when I'm already working so hard on our annual goals? And so sometimes what we feel like this webinar today and the tool that you're going to receive afterwards is just a good way to kind of have the right discussions with your leadership as you're thinking about planning this campaign. And it just helps everybody get on the same page about what do we need to have in place to know that we're ready? I think this is one of the biggest questions, right? Do we have the donors? Could we meet that goal? How can we make sure that we put together a campaign that is successful and it doesn't get sidetracked and we don't end up with a bigger goal than we started with and all of that stuff? So what you'll notice today about this conversation and about all of these steps we're taking is I'm not going to actually talk about your feasibility study at all. These are things that we want to make sure you have in place before you even are starting your feasibility study with your donors and your community. So these are all the pieces that really need to be in place before you're ready to embark on a campaign. So what I hope you can walk away from this webinar today with is just some ideas about those big pieces that you need to have in place. What are those steps to take? Or if you feel like you have those things in place, is there anything else that's missing? Any other conversations that need to be had? So as we're walking through this, feel free, of course, to put questions in the chat, and Kimberly is going to help facilitate those during the question and answer time. But feel free to put them in there at any time. She'll kind of collect those and we'll go through them. I do want to hear those questions, and I think there's probably going to be a lot. And don't worry about bringing something forward that's really specific to your organization, because many others that are on the line might have that same experience. So the other piece, this you'll see on the screen there, it says checklist of items. So I'm going to walk through the things that need to be in place, but at the end, after this webinar, you're going to actually get a scoring tool that you kind of enter in for your own organization, and then it actually gives you a score that tells you kind of how close you are to being able to be ready to launch a capital campaign. So let us get started. One of the things that, let me move my slide here. There we go. The very first thing, and this is weighed pretty heavily, and it might seem really obvious, is that we need a clearly defined project. So sometimes, as I mentioned, you might know, hey, we need more space, or we need this, or we need that. But really, what does that mean for your organization? So the biggest piece I would say is clear alignment with strategic plan. As you look at your defined project and what you want to do, did your strategic plan really inform that? If it didn't, you want to kind of go back and say, is it that our strategic plan isn't up to date? Or do we have a different set of leadership in place since the last time we put that together? And I know some of you might be thinking, oh, we don't even have a strategic plan. And that's okay. But there does have to be some alignment of the organization saying, here's the direction we're headed. And that direction has kind of shown us that this project is necessary for us to meet our goals. And we'll get a little bit later into the description of why we need to have that. But really, as we start, we need to make sure that we're aligned with those either strategic initiatives that everybody's been talking about, or a formal strategic plan, either one. And if we don't have that, that really is kind of the pre-step one, right? Making sure that we have an overall plan that this project can fit in. Because when your organization is investing, millions of dollars in a campaign, it really needs to be aligned with how you're going to be able to meet your mission. That second bullet there, programming and capacity building components. So not every campaign has these things, but I would say more and more over time, we've seen donors say, I'm not really interested in building that building until I have a clear understanding of how that's going to change your programming. Does that mean you're going to reach more people in a deeper way? Does it mean that you're going to add new programs that you couldn't do in your current space? And maybe this campaign isn't about a building at all, and it is just programming. You're wanting to launch a programming or some kind of capacity building. This is a question that people ask. Do you have the staff? If I'm going to make this big investment, do you have the staff and the other capacity and the resources to make sure that it's successful moving forward? So we can put those elements right into the campaign. And sometimes those get overlooked, and it doesn't have to be, it's not something we want to automatically put in there. What I've seen not be successful is when we haven't really thought through what that programming is going to be. We just know that if we had more space, we could do more things, which is true. But we have to be able to take that time and say, okay, what are the new things we can do? What are the new outcomes that we're going to see? What are those big pieces? So rolling those right into your campaign, even from a staffing perspective. And we need more staff. Great. Let's put that into the campaign as a whole project so that we can make sure that as the campaign, we raise the dollars, the campaign pieces are executed, and we're stronger for it afterwards. We're not making up for lost time that we didn't plan for. That next bullet there, endowment, portion, and use. Again, you don't have to have this in there, But for a lot of building projects, donors do kind of expect, many donors, to see an endowment piece or some kind of way that you're showing them that you're going to have some long-term funding, that it's not going to impact your overall sustainability. So endowments can be a good way to, and campaigns can be a good way to add to your current endowment or to build an endowment, start an endowment that helps support a specific thing. The key here is that we're not just putting a number in there because it's a number we want to hit with our endowment goal. Like maybe we have a $20 million endowment and we want to get to 30, so we just put 10 in the campaign. We really need to know, why do we need to increase it or build it, and what are our expectations for the use of those funds. And then this last bullet here, we've kind of talked about, I've kind of mentioned a little bit here with these other bullets, but measurable outcomes and impact on the community. You know, what are we expecting to gain outside of a new space? So these are all things as we're putting that project together. You know, a lot of times organizations are good at saying, hey, we found this building, it's available, we want to renovate it to be our new space. And we sort of stop the conversation there. You're going to get a lot farther if you really push that conversation to be saying, okay, that's how it will impact our organization, but how is it going to impact our overall community? How is it going to help us meet our mission long term? What are we expecting to see? Because if it's not about growth in one way, like I say, if it's not more in numbers, it can be deeper impact. It might be staff retention. That might be your goal or your outcome. We all know how expensive it is to be continuously retraining new staff. And so sometimes a component of a campaign is about staff retention, and many donors understand that. So don't be afraid to add some pieces in there that I think in the past we've thought of as not as exciting or sexy, sometimes people say, but they really need to be in there in order to make your entire project successful. The last thing we want to do is build a building that we can't really afford to operate. Right? So first things first, clearly defined project. And in that scoring tool, this is weighed very heavily in the score. Some of these other pieces have less of a weight to them because you can kind of get around or sort of make some changes to get to that point. But this one really is clear. It's here first for a reason. Not all of these things I'm going to go through. This isn't kind of a linear order necessarily, but this definitely, I would say, is number one. Next is the budget, and this kind of goes hand in hand, you know, with that. We want to clearly define the project first so that it informs our budget. And we have to be sure that we're including everything to do with what this capital campaign is going to be. I think we all know we can't go to donors asking to give to something that we're not sure how much it's going to cost. But these are some specific pieces that I would say get left out sometimes. This first one, pre-campaign planning costs. It costs money to plan, right? It costs money to put a strategic plan together. It costs money to put a business plan together. It costs money to get architectural drawings. All of these things really are your campaign costs, and it's okay to put them into your overall campaign budget and pay yourselves back, or put it into your overall campaign budget and connect with some early adopter donors and say, hey, we're putting this together. We're in the planning process. We want to build the best project we can. You're close to our organization. Would you help us cover some of these early costs, we'll say, and then paying yourself back, or if you're pulling it from operations to get through the planning stage, pay yourself back. It's really important to show that whole picture of cost, and the pre-campaign work is one of those things that we really don't want to leave out of the budget. This next bullet, of course, you're going to put your construction costs in there, but what I want to caution you all about is we want these to be real construction costs, okay? So we don't necessarily want those to be an architectural's best guess. A lot of times the architecture estimate and the construction estimate, they're different. I've almost never seen them match. So when you really get into it and you've got some great drawings, I think that's important. It gets your arms around a basic number, but making sure that you have construction estimates before you head out into your feasibility study is really, really important. Many times a construction company will walk through and maybe see something. If it's a building that you're renovating, maybe see something that you didn't know, or they might realize there's some kind of material. We've all seen that over the last year, the cost of wood. 10 years ago, it was the cost of steel that was so difficult to estimate. So there are some certain pieces that a construction company can tell you that your architecture company just isn't as up to date on in terms of information. So making sure that that's in there. Your campaign costs are next. Really understanding what is it going to cost us to do this campaign. So that means, am I hiring staff to add capacity? It means, what am I going to have to pay in materials? What am I going to, how many lunches am I going to go on? How many campaign meetings am I going to do that are going to cost some money? And then one of the key pieces there you'll see is donor recognition signage. I can't tell you how many times we get to the end of a project ready to celebrate our donors and no one has really accounted for the signage, or it is really an afterthought. And then we try to get it done, as cheaply as we can. When in reality, if we start at the beginning saying, this is how much of our budget we want to spend on signage and this is what it can look like, you really get a chance to have something that fits with your overall design. So that's important. But also you're all ready to pay for it and we don't end up cutting corners there. So thinking about that donor recognition signage. And then again, that programming capacity building, what needs to be in there to add to this construction piece that we're putting together. The next part of this budget, those are all kind of the pieces that need to be in place for putting that campaign budget together. But these next three pieces are really just additional work that should really be done at the same time we're budgeting. You'll see that timeline for cash flow. So really understanding, if our campaign, and this is, again, it seems really logical and that a lot of people would think of this, but a lot of times if we don't put pen to paper and say, okay, if we haven't even started our campaign yet, let's say we haven't even done feasibility, what's the earliest we could even put a shovel in the ground? And how much would we have to raise, not just in pledges, but cash? And then what would we do in the meantime? Are we going to do a construction loan? How are we going to do these things? So really mapping out that cash flow of, or the timeline for your cash flow, the timeline for getting pledges, the timeline for putting your cabinet together and your feasibility study. And then when is this building or this project going to be complete? And then what is it going to cost us? So really making sure that we're looking at backing out the time. And this is one of the best ways for those of you that have kind of found it hard to talk with your leadership about sort of putting the brakes on running out and doing a feasibility study, is just kind of, let's look at the timeline. Let's put pen to paper and say, how, what's it going to take? If a campaign is going to take 18 months, I would say that's the best, most tightly run campaign, right? And even that is literally just the implementation stage. That's not even the planning and recruiting of the cabinet and all of these things, right? So in order to kind of backtrack, okay, well, this is where it's going to be. And getting everybody comfortable with that timeline, showing that timeline, again, in the beginning, really just kind of helps manage everybody's expectations about the pace that we're going to move at. That next bullet, the pro forma, this is another really key area for planning that needs to be done before you head out into feasibility. This is something we often either have with us as we're doing feasibility studies, or we put it into the packet, which shows the donor community, this is how our organization's operations are going to be impacted by this campaign. And the board is the first group that needs to see this stuff, right? Making sure that they understand, okay, if we build this, and it's all estimates, right? It doesn't have to be down to the last dollar, but we really want to know, how do we plan and make sure that when our campaign is finished, we can run our organization and we can meet our annual goals. And if we don't think we can, what are some other pieces we need to put in place down the road or along the way to be sure that we do meet that operating need once the project is complete. And that last bullet, a business plan. So if your project involves adding a new program or adding a new component that's supposed to be revenue generating, or Maybe you have this is the first time you delved into a government contract, let's say, or some kind of service you're going to start selling versus what you were doing before. So putting a business plan together that sort of shows, okay, here's how we're operating today. And here's how we're going to, if we do X, Y, and Z, this is what it's going to look like. So different than the pro forma. The pro forma is for during and after, kind of just what are the numbers. The business plan really details how you're going to ramp up to that level. So another really important component. The next piece, getting that clear project, you guys are probably wondering, how is she going to get through all these bullets in the next few minutes? But we are, because these are the big key pieces, the budget and that clear project. All these other pieces, once you have those things in place, you're good. So this case for support really just ties all of that together. It needs to be clear. It needs to be urgent and compelling. Again, not how does it affect me or my staff or our organization, but how does it impact our community? What is the end user impact of this project? Being able to show what that looks like. Did we move the needle on something, or are we attempting to move the needle on something? And what are we expecting to have as a result? So it also should show your strength as an organization. It should tell them what you've been able to do in the past and be successful at, and how your organization came upon this campaign as something that needed to be executed. So that case for support, really, really important. This is a piece certainly that's part of the feasibility study, and all these pieces really are. It has to be developed before we go out into the community, and it has to have all of these pieces in order to really be to give you a clear picture. So you might have the best project in the world, and if you can't articulate it, you aren't going to have a good, successful feasibility study. So this case for support is really key. It doesn't mean that someone's going to read that case and then write their check, but it does mean someone's going to read that case and go, this is a project that needs to be supported, right? So that case for support is really, really important. You can write it internally, you can contract it out, but these cases are super, super important. And again, that second bullet, I can't stress enough, showing how it aligns with your strategic plan, showing how this project is so necessary and was pointed to in some way from your strategic plan. The next piece that's really important in getting ready for a campaign is kind of understanding that your leadership is prepared to take this on. So, and it has to be aligned. It can't be something where the board is moving forward on something and the CEO isn't sure. It has to be something where you have some continuity or at least succession planned. So really making sure that everybody is on board from the top down, that this is a project that needs to get done. Because we have to have strong leadership that supports this case and this project in order to filter down into our staff, into our campaign cabinet. All of this has to be, and it doesn't just have to be, yes, I think that's a good project, but yes, I'm motivated to get this done. So as a leader, I see my role. I'm going to do this and this and this, or here's how I personally am going to lead the organization through this. I'm personally motivated to give to this project. I'm personally motivated to ask others to participate, whether I'm making that specific dollar ask or I'm just inviting people to the table. Every leader, all the leaders need to play a role in that. Super important. As you go into feasibility, this is one of the key pieces I think that donors either ask if they're not sure or they comment on as part of their decision of whether or not they think they would give and that if they think it's going to be successful. That I've ever done a gift chart of any kind. This is really one of the best ways. Just taking a look and saying, if our total is this, do I have somebody who can give 10 to 20% of that? Do I have a lead giver? Now, campaigns have been done without a lead giver, but what you want to make sure is, okay, maybe I don't have one of those. Do I have two together that could do 10 or 20%? Do I have four that can, and so on. So really trying to map out, who do I think I have? And keeping in mind that we have to keep our annual giving going and solid during this time. So if you have some prospective donors, but you feel like they're maybe not going to give any more than they're giving for annual, that's an important part of the equation as well. Next slide, please. So the next thing we need are volunteers. Staff are really strong and they're so good at doing the fundraising and will definitely do the bulk of the work, but you're going to get so much farther by having a group of volunteers that's connected and that are being champions for you. So this is really, really key as you go forward thinking, if I had to pick a chair of my campaign, who would it be right now? Do I think they would do it and have the capacity and the bandwidth to do it? Could I put a cabinet together? Could I put an honorary cabinet together? You know, really making sure that you've got everything that you need in terms of that volunteer support. And this is one of the key pieces you can get going right now. You know, you want to be thinking about, for the fundraising I'm doing right now, is my board really involved? Or do I have non-board members who are really involved in my fundraising, making great connections for me? This is something you could put together right now, a donor development committee that just supports your annual giving so that you can start to kind of train volunteers to getting to this point. This is a great prep piece to be working on and thinking about, because as you want to grow, growing your fundraising exponentially, which is what a campaign does, you have to have volunteers to help you, right? Because we know currently our staff is working really hard. So making sure that we have a great group of volunteers and a diverse group of volunteers. So a bunch of people from the same network isn't going to be helpful. Do you have volunteers from many different networks, many segments of your community? Next slide, please. A history of support. This one is important for some organizations that are just starting, and this happens sometimes, that come together just for one thing. That's I would say, probably one of the only exceptions I would make to saying you need some history of fundraising success. So you'll see there's a few bullets there of how could you show that history? What are the indicators of success? Because your donors, while you may have some that will help you no matter what, they want to invest in a winning team. They want to invest their money in a project that they know is going to be successful. So showing some good success, a successful past capital campaign is probably the best way to show that strong support. But a lot of years of strong annual giving is another way to show that support. That shows your donors, hey, they've got a donor base to get this done. And definitely in feasibility in the past, we've heard that really be a stopping point for some people with a lot of capacity saying, I'm not confident this organization has the breadth of a donor base to meet this goal. So this is a really key factor. Now, this is not something necessarily you can't go back in time, as we know, but what you can do is really start building your strength. I've also heard donors say, hey, I know they've only had 1 year in the black so far. I need them to have a few years in the black before they come to me with a capital project or a campaign. So you can start right now in showing that strength. And sometimes that means investing in your current operations to really start to strengthen your fundraising. Next slide, please. Staffing. This is so key. I can't tell you how many times we've had an organization try to pull off a capital campaign without increasing their capacity. So this doesn't necessarily mean you need to hire someone just to run your capital campaign, but you do have to have the internal capacity to get this done. And I know everyone on here is a hard worker. And I think what we always hate to hear is, you just need to work smarter, not harder. And that is not true in capital campaigns. Smarter in this case means we added capacity in our staff because we knew we didn't have what we needed to get it done. So if you're barely making your annual goals, you don't have enough staff to run a campaign. And what it might look like is adding administrative staff at whatever level so that you can free up some of your other staff to do your major gift asks. So it's really about increasing capacity overall to get it done. Another thing that many organizations do as they're putting their plan together is they add some of that staffing capacity into their campaign costs. So they might say, well, we're going to hire someone part-time to project manage this campaign. Many times when you do that, you invest in that person who can help you with your fundraising. Many times when you do that, once the campaign's over, you've got a spot for them on your permanent team. So not unusual to do a contracted staffing level or person to help manage the campaign. And that doesn't mean you can hire someone just to do your campaign. That's pretty rare. Everyone's still, again, the leadership is still going to have to be invested in it and invest in the success. But really hiring someone to kind of project manage those pieces is probably the most common staffing position that gets added during campaign. So making sure we have the capacity to meet our annual goals and meet the campaign goal. Next slide, please. This one is really important too. I know I've been saying that for every slide here, but really and truly, your CRM does need to be pretty clean and up to date. We have to make sure we have good records. And sometimes what happens is we did have campaign success and we didn't do a good job of tracking those original campaign donors and understanding kind of how they can help us with this new project. And sometimes it's just because we didn't keep good data. Not even necessarily that we didn't keep that relationship going. So making sure we have good, accurate data about our prospects and making sure we have capability to give our cabinet what they need. You know, someone might volunteer and say, hey, I know that person. I'd be glad to talk to them about the campaign. You need to be able to tell them, hey, they're here volunteering every Friday, or they're here, they make a gift every time we do X, or this is kind of what it looks like. So a lot of this great records and research is to really arm not only your staff, but also your volunteers for the work, you know, really making sure that you have everything in place. And you'll see that 1, 2, 3, 4th bullet down. Having a system in place for who's managing what, having a system in place for how are we getting pledge payments, pledge reminders out there. I entered a job one time and I discovered there was a good amount of people who hadn't finished their payments on their pledge. And when I reached out, they said, no one ever reminded me. And so, no, I didn't, you know, and they felt bad, but were more frustrated than anything. And it's just because the right system wasn't really in place to do that from the start. So not only the system, not only the staff to do it, but the right amount of tools to do that with. And then that last bullet goes along with staffing capacity, making sure we have the staff to oversee. Somebody's in charge of keeping track of this stuff, and it's got to be right, because that is how you are going to meet this goal. Next slide, please. This is the last one. You know, motivation is so key. And I know I've said it a couple of times throughout this presentation, but if the leadership together and the board are not only excited about what happens when it's done, but really motivated to do the work, we're not going to get there. You know, the whole board and staff have to be able to see a pathway to success and have to be able to see and articulate what those outcomes are going to be once you're done with the work, and be motivated to get it done. And the more motivated they are, the better advocates for you they are going to be. So if your board is kind of lukewarm on getting this done, they're not going to be motivated to pick up their phone and call their connections. They're not going to be asking at every board meeting, okay, what can I do? How can I get there with you? If your CEO hasn't taken some time to put in their schedule and meet with donors right now, that isn't going to change as they move into campaign, right? So if they're not motivated to do it, and motivated means a lot of things to different people, but I'd say most often it means I'm setting time aside, I'm making myself personally responsible, and I'm prioritizing this work and to get it done. That's what it means. So without that, and without that clear focus, it will be very difficult to not only get to the goal, but also convince the community to come along with you. This piece is really, really important. So a lot of these pieces, you know, that we've talked about today are things you can get going on right now.
you know, whether you're that close to your campaign or not, particularly in terms of as you're putting your project together. You know, before you even go into feasibility, you can be talking with your donors about this potential project. There are so many great opportunities with donors to get them engaged in the development of the project. When you think about how do I make sure that I didn't come up with this project on my own? Did I involve my end users in how I crafted it and put it together? You know, inviting donors to some of those sessions to participate as well is a great way to bring them along, so that by the time you get to putting a feasibility and study in front of them, they've been a part of it all along. You know, by the time that foundation is asking you, okay, did you involve your clients in this project? You can answer, yes, I did. And here's how we did it. So really, there are so many pieces that you can slowly put together and not feel the rush of putting your budget in your project and getting it all on paper, but really making sure that you're spending all this time on the front end so that when you go into feasibility study, you're ready to go. You've brought your donors along. Your end users are excited, your staff is excited, everybody's motivated to get it done. So as I mentioned at the beginning, there is a scoring tool that you're going to get that has all of these elements, and it asks some specific questions about what you're going to need to have in place. So it'll say, ask you certain questions in each of these categories. You put your own score down, and then it kind of tells you what to do next. So everyone will get that scoring tool, and everyone can use, you'll see at the bottom of this screen here, using the coupon code for Fund Kit, which is another Qunari Consulting product. It's a series of instructional videos. I would say in particular, so you'll have access to one of the series for at no cost as a participant today. And the one I think I would recommend as you're preparing for a capital campaign, there's a major gift series in there. And it just kind of walks through, you know, how do I bring my major givers along? How do I cultivate them? And that's really for major annual giving. But really, if you're able to grow your major annual giving, you will be successful in your campaign. If you haven't had any chance to cultivate those major donors, it's going to be really tough for you to be successful in a campaign. So check that out on FundKit. And you'll also get a opportunity to reach out to me or one of my colleagues for a 30-minute consultation if you have specific questions that don't get answered today. So here we are. Back to you, Kimberly.
You're muted, Kim.
Yeah. I still don't hear Kim.
No, me either.
Okay.
It was me. So what I was saying is this: if any of you still do have some questions you'd like to ask, please drop that in. I know we do have a few questions here. One from Paul. If we don't have an integrated strategic plan, does this task take the longest time to develop?
Oh, not necessarily. Great question. This is a great question. You know, not necessarily. I think sometimes what I hear a lot of times when you don't have a full written, you know, fancy strategic plan, one of your leaders has an idea of what the strategic initiatives are, if not more than one. So sometimes what we find is the CEO has a clear direction and the board is actually behind that, but no one's ever really written it down. You know, they've kind of talked through, here's what we want to be, et cetera. You don't have to necessarily, I mean, I think, yeah, I love it when everybody goes through they get a consultant and they do a strategic plan. But I also think sometimes the opportunity and the timeline just don't line up quite right to do that. And so as long as you're able to put some of those strategic initiatives on paper and go through the formal process of having your board and staff kind of sign on to that, I think that serves well. I think that is a good first step if you don't have the resources or timeline to go through the full-on strategic planning process.
Okay, well, hopefully, Paul, that helps answer that one. A couple other questions here that were submitted. How should I be communicating with donors about a campaign when I'm still in the planning stages?
Yeah, awesome question as well. You know, this is something where what we always say is talk about the project, not the campaign. So sometimes it's as simple as just avoiding the word campaign and sort of sharing those strategic goals you have as an organization and say, you know, down the line, we really love to develop X, Y, and Z. And so sharing it in a vision type way before we've put pen to paper is great, because again, that's when you start to hear not just I'm going to talk to my donors because I need to do that, but they also have great advice. They have great input that helps guide you too. So doing it in such a way that says, here's what we're thinking, kind of offering those big picture pieces without saying we're going to launch a campaign, you know, next year, anything like that, but just kind of here's where we're headed as an organization. And this is what might be needed to get there. And then listening, stop and listen to what those donors are telling you. Because not that you would guide your, you know, change your project because of a donor's input, but you need that input as part of, hey, this is a stakeholder and they're saying this, and let's bring that back to the table and really review how to integrate that advice or input in some way if we can. And if it doesn't align, it doesn't align, and that's okay. You can kind of set that advice aside and move on to the rest of your planning.
Well, thank you. That I think that was great. We have time for a few more questions. The next one I have here is from Anne. How long should I plan for my campaign once all of these pieces are in place?
Once these pieces are in place is when you would kind of head into your feasibility study. And your study would then kind of inform, you know, when we come out of feasibility study, we usually have one of three answers. I would say two of them are more common. The first one, of course, is, yep, we found the dollars, you can head right into campaign. If that's the case, you know, we usually have you plan about 18 months to get that done, getting all the pledges in, certainly not all the payments by that time, but hitting your goal with pledges. Sometimes though, you come out of feasibility study and you come up a little bit short of the goal. And so there's a couple of ways you could head. You can sort of alter your project, which we've done sometimes. But the other step sometimes is just trying to reach out to more donors and cultivate them a little bit more. Sometimes when we get an indication that people go, oh yeah, I'm excited, but I'm probably at this level, and we know they have more capacity, they might just not be engaged enough with the organization. Sometimes we take some time to do some major gift cultivation in between launching the campaign and the feasibility study. So when that's the case, sometimes that time on the front end makes sure that once you are ready to launch your campaign, it does still only take you 18 months. If you go ahead and launch without the indication from the study, it's going to take you as long as it would have if you had just done the planning on the front end. So just as a rule there.
Okay. And then I have, what if my organization doesn't have a strategic plan? Can I still move forward with a campaign?
Yeah, I mean, I would say you definitely need to have something on paper that aligns with your mission and is a set of some initiatives at least that you all share. Again, getting that alignment with the board, the executive director and staff leadership as well. And yes, these are our strategic initiatives. I think those still need to get written down and confirmed. So there has to be some kind of alignment, and it usually can't be drawn just from looking at your mission statement and going, this is our mission. It usually needs to be a little bit more spelled out than that.
Okay. Well, those are all the questions that I have, unless anyone has a last one they want to submit. Mary, thank you. Sorry about our technology glitch, but I'm glad you were able to get back online with us. So thank you to everyone also for joining us today. Again, we are going to be emailing a recording of today, a link to this presentation, and some other great resources, including that link to contact Mary and her team to receive the free scoring tool and access to the Qunari Fun Kit series. If you would like to reach out to anyone on the QGIve team or the Qunari Consulting team, please take note of this contact information on this last slide. There is a survey as you're logging off today, so please don't forget to do that if you can. It really is helpful. We appreciate it. We hope that the information that we covered today really does help you understand the importance of a capital campaign in your fundraising. Thank you again for spending time with us, and we will be in touch. So thank you and have a fabulous weekend and take care.